Dr. Phil Renshaw started his career in international banking and treasury, going on to become a finance director in the IT sector. It took 20 years before the penny dropped and he realised that a singular focus on the numbers is not the route to business and organisational success, but rather the recognition that it's all about the people. As Phil moved into the field of leadership and development, he had another light bulb moment. Our efforts to instill the skills of coaching into leaders and managers is wasting huge amounts of time and money because we're failing to understand that the leader who coaches does not use their skills in the same way as professional coaches. Rather, they're coaching on the go. Phil's mission, alongside his business partner and co-author, Dr. Jenny Robinson, is to free us all to become leaders who coach. They've developed a research-based initiative and globally unique tool for anyone to develop these skills. As Marshall Goldsmith said of their book, successful leaders achieve change through effective coaching. This book shows you how, starting today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Phil.
Of course, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
The trend for coaching as a leadership style is becoming more and more prominent, and it's kind of the go-to style for modern leaders. So, why do you think a coaching style is so important with leaders these days?
For me, I think it's if we stand back, we do an exercise a lot with the people that we work with, and so much so that it's actually became part of our research. We gathered the data from doing this exercise, and we've probably surpassed 1,000 people by now. And we do an exercise where we ask everybody to think of the best person that they've ever worked for or with. We sometimes refer to this exercise as the best boss exercise, but it doesn't have to have been your boss. It could have been someone alongside you or a project manager, and it might not have even been at work. You know, it could be in a community environment in the church or so on. But think of somebody, and really, if you can't think of anyone, then take the question a different way, because the question is, think of that person and then write down what it is that they did. What were their behaviors? What were their actions? And so if you can't think of anyone, if you're unlucky enough to be in that situation, then think of what you'd want them to be. And the answers we get are always, I mean, consistently, it's remarkable how consistent they are, describe what we would consider the dimensions of coaching. So we've basically indirectly asked people to describe leadership. We've indirectly asked them to say, what is leadership? What makes leadership good? What do you think good looks like? And they consistently don't answer with the sort of classic definitions of leadership, which are vision and mission and, guide, that sort of approach. Or strategy, for example. They almost never talk about those things. What they talk about are people who have time for you. Even in an incredibly busy world, they can find time. Somehow they seem to give you their full attention. People who listen, who have great questions that help you think, but challenge you. People who really support you. Nonetheless, they build great trust with you. You feel good working with those people. That they give great feedback, that they help you see things from different perspectives. All the many things that they describe, we say, well, if you build those all up together, that is coaching. It's just woven into their everyday leadership. So in a way, we're saying the best leadership has to involve this stuff that we call coaching. So when we refer to it as a coaching style of leadership, I'm almost uncomfortable because I feel what people are telling us is, no, this is leadership.
Yeah.
That is part of it. Just it's woven in. They're not coaching all the time in that sort of purist sense, but they're drawing on these different skills. And I tell you, it is amazing. We do this. We've done it with people from many different backgrounds. From groups from Africa, groups from Asia, groups from Eastern Europe. We've done it with young people, probably no younger than 18, but that's still a good, people with limited experience of life and certainly of work. And then we've done it with much older people. We've done it with the very experienced to those more junior. They consistently basically come up with these same answers. And to me, that's why for some reason, that's perhaps just a reflection of the trend, maybe. But to me, it's saying that's very clearly important. That's part of
Yeah.
leadership.
And what does coaching on the go mean, and how can leaders effectively integrate this approach into their daily interactions with their team?
So the on the go idea is this idea of, as I was just describing, there are different dimensions of coaching, and if you can separate them out and just take one of them and just add it into what you're doing anyway, it's kind of on the go or in the
Mm.
moment, right? It's just part of what you're doing. I think I used the phrase earlier that it's woven into your leadership. That came from Jenny Robinson, my partner in all this, Dr. Jenny Robinson, she is now. Her PhD was into leadership,
Mm.
and she used the metaphor of weaving in her PhD. And I think it's a lovely idea. So this idea of on the go is, don't make it complicated, just add a small thing into
Mm.
what you're already doing. If you think, maybe I'm not so good at asking great questions, how good am I at that? Well, maybe just spend a day or a week thinking, I'm going to have a go this week at trying to ask
Mm.
better questions in whatever I'm already doing. So it's part of that activity, on the go. And to be fair, I should compliment our editor at Pearson, where our book is published, because they actually made the suggestion through challenging a previous title that was trying to do the same thing, but was nowhere near as good as Coaching on the
Mm.
Go.
And in the fast-paced environment of modern workplaces, opportunities for formal coaching sessions can be very limited.
Mm.
But like you've said, the most impactful coaching moments can be spontaneous or through everyday interactions. So, what are some practical strategies for leaders to identify moments in everyday situations and use them to drive development?
So it's a great question, because I think sitting underneath it is the possible assumption that you often hear other people talk about. You didn't, but other people sometimes do, which is looking for, the opportunity to coach. That's often a question people talk about. And the one that's most often described is when you're in one-to-one meetings with a team member, if you've got your own team, that's a great opportunity to coach. Our concern is that is elevating, or maybe it's not elevating, but it's separating coaching out as being something different. Now I coach and now I don't coach. And we're saying, yeah, that's not what we think is the right answer here. That's not what leadership is about. We call them leaders who coach, to try and give this phrase of connecting the two.
Mm.
Professional coaches, of course, they definitely do that. That's absolutely what they do. They just sit down and coach someone. In most cases, we think that's not what leaders are doing, or leaders who coach are doing. So we would say, think about the different dimensions of coaching. And if you don't know what those are, our work is published. It's publicly accessible. Academic stuff, not just the book that you have to pay for. And it sets out what our research and the research of others suggests are these dimensions. And they're the things I mentioned earlier, or examples I gave, such as great questions, great listening, building trust and rapport, being present in the moment,
Mm.
um, helping other people change their perspectives. There's many different layers. Pick one of those out and then think, how can I get better at that? How would that improve my leadership? And you might decide, actually, you're already pretty good at it, in which case, don't worry, choose another one. And
Mm.
then just make it a small experiment. We call them behavioral experiments, and add it into your everyday life. You're already having meetings. So the opportunities to add these small things in are just there already. Make it a small experiment, then reflect on whether it produced the outcomes you were hoping for. And if not, change it. And if it does, keep going, and it'll become a habit.
Mm. And recognizing that the kind of one size fits all solutions really meet everybody's needs, how can leaders ensure that coaching on the go is personalized and impactful for their whole team, given different needs or learning styles?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of ways of answering that question. One is to have everybody in your team or in your group approach this idea of coaching on the go together, explore it
Mm.
together, and say, we can all improve at this, because these skills that we're talking about have got nothing to do with work experience, right? Even if you're 18, you learn these skills. Probably if you're younger, it's just I don't work with children, so that's not. I couldn't speak to that, but logically, one could with children as well. And so by bringing everybody into the conversation, I think it makes it more accessible. It makes it more, shall we say, human as well, because you're acknowledging that you as a leader, or as the leader of the team, I mean, are also developing, and then you can share how you're working on these things together. I think that would be my sort of main thought. The second one, as an answer, would be to focus on the dimension that we call building trust and rapport, because that is a key part of successful leadership, and that has to be done on a one-to-one basis ultimately, because of course everyone is different, and building trust and rapport usually involves sharing information, asking great questions to help other people share with you, but in an appropriate way, so as not to put them under pressure. There's not a requirement to share and so on, but it's about getting to know those other people. That will take time. That's why building teams doesn't happen overnight, and it's why, you know, adding a new person into your team changes the whole dynamics. Just one person, but spending the time doing that, and then of course, if you can, encouraging those around you to do the same with each other, I think that will be a good go-to spot, because then you're going to get a sense of what helps motivate those other people, how they would prefer to hear feedback or be given feedback, which questions, you know, work for them. I remember, it just brought to my mind, actually, I was working last year with this chap who was, I think, Polish. He was certainly Eastern European, so he was dealing with that added factor of talking in a second language. And he had a team of people, and he was in IT, so arguably there's a third language. IT is complicated, and he was practicing this idea of seeing if he could get better at questions and how they would help his team, because his issue was that he felt he was doing too much. You know, he wasn't delegating enough, so he thought he'd practice through asking questions. When he came back to the first group session, he said, the one thing I've got to share with everyone is, it's amazing how the same question doesn't work for everybody. That's what I've learned from practicing. I'd got this question, he said, and he shared the question, and he said, it worked brilliantly with the first person, and then with the second person, it just fell flat. And I thought that's great. You know, it's a great insight to learning. And so he was saying, I'm going back, I'm practicing, I'm keeping notes, trying to get a sense of which questions work best for which people. And he was saying you can't know, because not only does the same question not work for another person, but potentially it doesn't work another time for the same person, because you don't know the context and so on. And so it's just knowing that and exploring is one of the things you need to do.
Yeah. And you've touched on how anyone can learn these skills and harness these skills, someone from early in their career into late into their career. But how can leaders use the coaching on the go style to support the development of future leaders within their organization?
So the first thing I would say, which is a real challenge, is I would ask us not to use the phrase future leaders, because I think we're all leaders already, and there's lots of research and other people who support that argument. It's this idea that leadership comes from collaboration, how we work together. So however junior you are, you're going to have an impact on the leadership of the team or the organization. Whatever you do, it's going to have that impact. And a lot of the choices you make are the same type of choices as people who are very senior. So I would choose some other phrase like senior leaders, right? Future senior leaders, because that's the change. So your question was how to help them grow and develop. For me, I think it would be my answer is almost trite, because the whole idea of coaching is about helping others to find their solutions, their way of growing, their way of delivering. And if you make that a key part of what you're trying to do as a leader, the outcome will automatically be that you are helping the other people around you, whether they work for you or not. You'll be helping them to grow and develop, because you'll be asking them questions rather than telling them the answers. And even when they're junior and can't possibly know the answers, sometimes it's great in the right environment when they're not feeling threatened by it. Ask them what they think. It's
Mm,
remarkable how often people already know the answers. And
yeah.
we work with young people on apprenticeship schemes and love to keep pointing this out to them. You're already leaders. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell us what you think the answer is? And you'll be surprised how often we will agree. We'll say, as far as we can tell, we may have 40 years more experience than you, but you're already right. So carry on.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your stories and ideas and advice today. Just before we end, I'd like to come back to a few more quick fire questions, if that's okay.
Of course,
So, do you or have you ever played a musical instrument?
I have. Would you like to know which one?
Yes, please.
So I used to play the piano. My father was a music teacher early in his career. So I learned to play the piano as my sister did from the age of 7. I briefly had a dalliance trying to play the trombone because my father could play that as well, but that didn't go so well. So I didn't
Mm.
do that.
So, can you still play the piano or?
No, sadly, I suffered an injury in my neck, so it actually prevents me from playing the piano, which is rather sad. But never mind. Music is still out there to be enjoyed.
What was the last book that you read?
Oh, now there's a question. I am literally going to have to turn. I know that you people can't see me turning, but I'm going
I
to
was
turn
going.
because the book is behind me, and the book is called "We Can't Talk About That at Work."
Okay. Do you mind giving us a brief synopsis?
Not at all. This is a really fascinating book. It was suggested to me by a client of mine in the UK. It's actually written by some people in the US, which is significant because it's got a very much a US angle to it.
Mm.
But it's basically talking about the things that we in general feel that we can't talk about at work, so we don't talk about at work, which leads us to bottling things up that are actually causing lots of problems. And they
Mm.
give some very powerful issues which are all about basically race and religion and politics. So
Mm.
those sorts of things, particularly as the British stereotype is to avoid anything that might be
Yes.
conflicting. And they're saying some of these issues are so significant at an individual level that if you don't talk about them, you're actually creating potentially huge problems.
So, just finally, we've recently added a new feature to the podcast where we flip the roles and we ask you to pose a question for your next guest. So, first of all, the previous guest we had on was Riaz Hassan, who is the head of the Anti Racist Wales Action Plan. And their question to you was, what steps have you taken uh, or plan to make in your organisation to make it more representative of the local demographics, including that you ensure that your service delivery and engagement are more inclusive?
Gosh, well, I don't know that I have an answer that speaks to the local demographic
Mm.
in the sense of where I'm based regionally, but Jenny and I, who are the business owners, we are regularly repeating our obsession with the fact that we happen to be two white old folk, and that is not a particularly good demographic. So we are always, when we're looking for new partners to work with us, we're always trying to appropriately promote, those who are from minorities compared to us, which is, of course, almost everybody in some senses because we are such an obvious demographic. And we've actually been pretty successful so far. We've got some great people around the world from different nationalities and different gender identities and so on. So we're doing okay. But at the end of the day, we are still two old, white, middle-aged folk.
And now, can you please tell us what your question for our next guest is?
So I did try and have a think about this, and then I realised I was sort of in my own bubble. So I think I don't know whether my questions will be that good. One question might be, given all that we know, why is the world still so obsessed with the idea of the hero leader? This idea that one individual is actually responsible for everything. Why do we put so much credibility on, or maybe it's not always credibility, choose my words carefully, but so much attention to the person who's at the top, all wanting to be Elon Musk or whomever, choose your individual. But those people, yes, there's something different about them, but they couldn't have got where they got without support and collaboration from other people around them. And yet we still seem to fall into this trap of training people. When we talk about training, we talk about leadership, we sort of describe it in that you're trying to be that person at the top. That's no, the leaders are everywhere, all around us. So yeah, I think my question would be, given all that we know, why are we still so obsessed with this idea of the hero leader?
That's a great question. I'm really excited to see how they answer it. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Phil. I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
Absolutely, thank you.
Mae un podlediad sgyrsiau ar arweinyddiaeth ar gael trwy ein gwefan. Mae'r hawlfraint y podlediad yma yn cael ei gadw gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Our Conversations on Leadership podcast is available through our website. Copyright of this podcast is held by the Welsh Government.